Our modern wastewater treatment practices were first developed through the late 1800s to the early 1900s. In this time, several fundamental processes were identified and pioneered. The first large-scale treatment plants represented one of the many leaps forward in public health that we experienced throughout the 20th century. The efficiency of treatment plants is ever improving through the minimization of cost and the maximization of results, a feat achieved by decades of science and engineering. This video report will explore the inner workings of one treatment plant in the Redlands, Brisbane. I will also discuss some of the existing and emerging environmental issues associated with the plant. But before I explain how Redlands treatment plant works, I should give some context for why it even exists in the first place. We should know what wastewater is before we dive into how it's treated. Wastewater is everything we flush down our drains and pour down our sinks. It comes from homes and businesses. It contains all kinds of substances, all sorts of chemicals and chunks of stuff. The possibilities are endless. Thanks to all this, the mix of substances that makes its way into the sewerage system is dangerous to our health and to the environment. A ton of diseases are transmitted through human waste contamination, including some big names like cholera, dysentery, and typhoid. Many nutrients you'll find in sewerage support diverse communities of microbial life. In fact, the nutrients themselves can cause issues beyond disease if they're released freely into the waterways. Eutrophication occurs when algae thrive in nutrient-overloaded water. This algae bloom depletes dissolved oxygen in the water, causing widespread species die-off and massive ecosystem damage. Many places in the world today suffer thanks to the lack of wastewater treatment options. Wastewater treatment is absolutely one of the pillars of public health. Without it, mortality rates would be higher, and our aquatic ecosystems would be under a lot more pressure than they already are. But thankfully, we're past the days of emptying bedpans out the window. We have robust wastewater treatment facilities that convert our refuse into safe, clear, and sometimes potable water. Although it's not without flaws, and I'll talk about those later, the Redlands wastewater treatment plant adequately handles the wastewater generated in its surrounding suburbs. It services domestic and industrial sources, including a hospital, but it's a relatively small plant compared to others. Now, I'll walk you through each step of the treatment plant's operations. The general process is essentially the same between treatment plants, but some use different technology or conduct additional phases of treatment towards the end. This here is the soul of the Redlands wastewater treatment plant. I'll take us through this map one step at a time, following the flow of wastewater, which is this lime green color line. We'll look into each process, represented here as shapes that roughly mirror the real-life infrastructure. But first, we should discuss how the water gets to the plant in the first place. The water you empty into your drains travels underground via a branched network of pipes that resembles your bronchial tubes. For the most part, gravity propels sewage through the pipes. As we'll see, gravity is harnessed several times throughout this whole process. Inevitably, the sewerage pipes reach an elevation too low to be useful. At these points, lifting stations are installed. Inside the lifting stations, sewerage is moved vertically by pumps, from which point it can continue its downward slide. Lifting stations are strategically positioned. Their number is minimized by installing them at key areas, places of low elevation where smaller pipes have already converged into larger ones. Through this network of pipes, the area's wastewater arrives at the treatment plant. Immediately after it arrives, wastewater enters the primary treatment phase. The water is propelled by a final lifting station and other pumps through a series of filters. First, the influent will pass through a large particle filter. This is a screen that catches large particles, redirecting and ejecting them into a nearby receptacle. At Redlands, the most common items caught in the filter are sanitary items, like non-flushable wipes and tampons. Once the influent is free of large particles, it'll go through a finer filter called the grit filter. This filter catches and removes smaller inorganic and undigestible particles. Looking into this receptacle reveals a lot of corn. The contents of these bins will be taken for burial. The primary treatment phase is characterized by mechanical separation processes, or the physical removal of large contaminating particles. Conversely, secondary treatment is characterized by biological processes. Secondary treatment at Redlands involves 3 separate processes. First of those is biological treatment, which is really where the main work occurs. A big part of what makes untreated wastewater so dangerous is its high nutrient load. A good way to get rid of these nutrients is to cultivate organisms that will consume them, microbes. The biological treatment process was explained to me by likening it to a bug farm, and this is helpful imagery to understand it. By caring for our bug farm, we ensure that they stay healthy and produce desirable results for us. The ecosystem is composed mostly of bacteria, but it also includes protozoa, fungi, and nematodes living in a managed environment where they can thrive. Influent is pumped from primary treatment into the aerobic zone. Here, the wastewater is aerated by injecting oxygen into the water and by generating turbulent waves. With enough dissolved oxygen available, natural metabolic processes of nitrifying bacteria, or nitrosomas, are encouraged. They can efficiently consume organic nutrients from the water and convert them into something more manageable. For example, ammonium is converted to nitrite, acid, and cell energy. Other bacteria, called nitrobacter, convert that nitrite into nitrate. Wastewater is held within the aerobic zone for long enough so that most of the organic nutrients can be converted into more manageable compounds. This process is called nitrification. The wastewater then moves into the anoxic zone, so called because the area is kept almost devoid of dissolved oxygen. A lack of pure oxygen encourages certain heterotrophic bacteria to source it from the available nitrates. These bacteria consume nitrates and produce nitrogen gas, which safely bubbles away into the atmosphere. Hydroxide is also released, which helps to counteract the acids produced during nitrification. This process is called denitrification. Similar processes occur for other compounds, removing elements like sulfur and iron. After spending a sufficient amount of time in the aerobic and anoxic zones, wastewater leaves the biological treatment tank and moves into the clarifiers. Clarification occurs in 2 large tanks at Redlands. Here, gravity is used to settle microbes and other undigested particles to the bottom. The sludge that forms at the bottom is called activated sludge because of its metabolic activity. It is removed from the clarifier from below. Water at the top of the clarifier breaks over the weirs along the edge. At this stage, the water is visibly clear, ready to be sent into tertiary treatment. The activated sludge collected from the bottom is an important resource. To keep the microbe population flourishing, some of it is returned to the biological treatment tank. Excess activated sludge is transferred into this building for pressing. Here, water is mechanically separated from the sludge via a series of presses and conveyors. Dewatered sludge is deposited into a biohazards container and sold onto farmers as compost. Apparently, demand for this sludge is very high at Redlands, and buyers will line up outside to receive it. The pressed water is returned to the beginning of the biological treatment stage. Water released by the clarifier enters a small tertiary treatment phase. In this tank, chlorine is added to the water and kept in contact with it for just a handful of hours. In this time, the influent is sterilized, killing any latent microbes from biological processing. This would typically be the endpoint for a treatment plant that releases effluent into the ocean. However, Redlands effluent is released into a nearby stream or used for irrigation, so the chlorine residues must be removed. In this final phase, chemicals are added to the water to consume chlorine residues, neutralizing them and producing clean effluent ready to be released to nature. A high proportion of the effluent is diverted for irrigation of the grass on the premises, while the rest is released into a stream. The entire treatment process from collection to release is monitored and controlled by engineers and systems in the control building. Through a computer interface, engineers can set up treatment schedules and adjust certain factors of the process. They can also call up detailed information about the quality of effluent in the plant. Some of this information is gained via sensors within the system, while some requires direct sampling and analysis of water at the various stages of treatment. From this control room, engineers monitor factors like pH, dissolved oxygen, biological oxygen demand, microbe demographics, nutrient concentrations, chlorine residues, and flow rates. Essentially, they ensure that the treatment plant runs flawlessly. In the event of an issue, engineers are always on call and ready to respond to the situation. And that is the treatment process of wastewater at the Redlands treatment plant. Now, I will discuss the various environmental issues that are associated with the Redlands wastewater treatment plant. The operation of these plants is strictly governed by government guidelines, dictating effluent quality and all the processes involved. This is to ensure the health and safety of the public and the environment. However, even with restrictions, wastewater treatment plants generate impacts. The main concerns that I have identified is the heavy release of effluent into a natural waterway. Redlands effluent quality is typically well below all parameters set by legislation, indicating that it is particularly clean. Yet, this doesn't necessarily tell us much about the stream that is receiving the effluent. The quality is determined by standardized guidelines that don't necessarily consider the quality of water already found in the natural waterway. Even if Redlands effluent comfortably meets government standards, it is difficult to determine whether it meets the stream's requirements. Beyond the chemical quality of effluent, its temperature is also a concern. Massive release of water into a waterway will change its temperature, and could cause impacts to the ecosystem by changing those conditions. Many species require a very particular temperature range to flourish, especially aquatic ones, and wastewater effluent is not temperature controlled to match the receiving system. Additionally, there are compounds in wastewater that have no available treatment pathway yet. Compounds derived from human hormones and pharmaceuticals are present in effluent, especially for a treatment plant that services a hospital, but neither their treatment options nor their environmental impacts are very well understood. This presents a significant challenge to the future of wastewater treatment. Engineers globally are actively working to introduce cost-effective ways of detecting and treating a variety of currently unaccounted for compounds. In the meantime, they represent a flaw in the wastewater treatment process. An environmental challenge separate from effluent quality is the generation of solid waste. In primary treatment, tons of solid waste are generated and require management. The non-biodegradable solid waste generated at Redlands is sent for burial at a landfill. Public education may represent the only feasible way to reduce solid waste accumulation. By eliminating non-flushable items from storage, non-biodegradable waste could be dealt with through existing domestic solid waste management systems. And there we have it. We've explored most of the wastewater treatment processes at the Redlands plant and discussed several outstanding issues. Visiting the treatment plant was essential for understanding how these processes occur. The friendly engineers controlling the plant were knowledgeable about all aspects of the process, leaving me to feel content that our wastewater is handled responsibly and professionally.